sometimes parents just don't quite know how to love their
They're
child, or
confused.
exactly. And there's so many confusing messages out there. And I mean, there's been messages out there that are really just end up being really harmful. And we do, like, sadly, we do, like, sometimes family rejection happens.
Hi, everybody. I am just so excited. It's a Friday, almost afternoon here in beautiful sunny Minnesota. And I'm just really, really excited for my guest today. And let me tell you a little bit about ClarK. ClarK Hoelscher, she has a Ph.D., so she's a doctor, is a lifelong partner to those on learning journeys who believe all learning begins with authentic and purposeful relationships. That's beautiful. Most of their work has been under the title educator in and around schools, colleges, and the institutions around them. They engage communities around justice, healing, and transformation. Their favorite event each year is QQuest, which brings almost 1,000 young LGBTQIA2 plus people and their adult advocates together from middle and high schools. This is so dear to me, across Minnesota for learning, fun, and leadership. Dr. Hoelscher's work with grief is rooted to times of identity transformation. For instance, in roles like student to teacher, or within families such as mother of a daughter to mother of a son. They have found acknowledging loss during these transformations openly has been imperative to desired growth and sustained relationships. So, Dr. ClarK Hoelscher, I'm just so excited. Actually, just to be totally forthright with everybody here, we've known each other for a really, really, really long time in a family relationship, but we have never sat down in a professional conversation like this. She knows I'm very curious all the time. She shared a beautiful private post with me when I had put something out about the grieving aspect. And so, ClarK, welcome.
Yeah, it's so good to be here with you, Pat. Thank you so much. Yeah, my pronoun is they, and
They.
I just want to, like, acknowledge that, like, there's like even like these little ways, like, as we make change, that, like, even like something as little as, like, adjusting to someone's pronoun change is a transformation. And, like, even when it's something that doesn't feel like it's really that big of a deal, it can even have, like, some elements of, like, grief to it, and, like, a little bit of, like, confusion and disorientation, and, like, some, like, anger, and, like, there's a little bit of, like, resistance and negotiation. Like, it has all of those same components. But yeah, I
Thank you for
recognize
that
that.
because,
Sure.
it's all learning for me too, right?
It is, and we're all always learning. And I really believe, to that learning is in partnerships, and that, like, I always want to meet folks, like, exactly where they're at, and then just, like, establish, like, care and relationship, and then move to the next step and the next step. And so, like, I'll tell folks, like, I don't have any judgment about where you're starting from, because, like, the universe, like, made you whole and wonderful, and you are just who you are meant to be. And though the universe has brought you to me, and so what we're going to do is we're going to, like, have a path, and we're moving forward, and, like, and so as long as, like, you're going to be, like, in with me on this path and this journey together, then I'm going to be beside you, moving that way. So, like, I just really like to put that aside. So yeah, I like you're we are family, and I've always felt, though, this, like, connection on the, like, educator healer side. But when there's lots of people around, and so many, like, littles with their needs and desires, it's just sometimes hard to, like, have those deeper conversations. So excited to be here today.
I know this is so cool. It's so cool. So as people who know me know that I work in the grief coaching space. And we were just talking about before we came on to the video about, how vast that is. That, right now I'm actually helping the healers, helping the teachers, helping the coaches to get more confident to hold the space in grieving families. And the grief is not necessarily the physical death of a loved one. It can be all these things. And so I had put something out on Facebook, and then you had private messaged me, and you started talking about some different components of grief that
Mhm.
you have seen in your work and in your life. And so, do you want to just kind
Yeah,
of jump in and share a little bit, and let's
yeah,
talk about that?
absolutely. Yeah, a lot of the work that I do is towards creating learning environments where instructors and students are invited to bring like their whole selves fully into the space, because and I deeply believe that like, there's not going to be a lot of good learning that's possible unless folks have a good relationship and have trust with each other and can be truthful and honest with each other and have a good container where like that relationship can be held, because learning often involves like a couple falls and some can involve like a couple little, there can be like some missteps, like even learning to bike, you anticipate that you hope no one's going to get hurt too bad, but it's good to have a first aid kit ready and to set up as many proactive safety measures as possible. So um, part of that work that I do, I realized very early as a coach, working with new teachers, that there was often a lot of fear. And as they were making like changes, moving from their identity from like a student into their identity as a teacher. So there were all these fears, and there was, sometimes like anger and sadness and, just a lot of these complex emotions. And like, as I was like, what, just inquiring, like, what's going on with this? I realized that it was grief. And so these identity transformations, like any time that someone is moving from one big concept of themselves to another big concept of themselves, either because they're choosing it or sometimes because life has like thrust it upon them, um, grief is a big part of it. And so like part of then, as my own career and work changed, I started really working on identity transformations where folks were being invited to see themselves in a very different way. So to construct a teacher identity that was really centering students of color, and that was big enough to contain the like frameworks for justice, and that might sometimes be um, at least like and folks would struggle, and there would be some of that like negotiation and that anger and that sadness, because they might perceive that there was some conflict about like their old sense of self and like the new sense of self that they were being like invited towards. And so I just started like really working with folks to name that. And one thing I observed pretty early was for a lot of white folks, and I was a lot of the time working with like white women, even talking about emotions and like identifying emotions was really challenging. And so, like I am always like, every time I find like, well, here's a thing that's hard for the people that I'm working with. So what tools are available?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always learning. And so, I use tools like, feelings wheels, and it's like part of that practice is like, okay, what are you feeling right now? And like,
Yep.
how are you feeling today? How are you doing today? And just like constantly checking in the coaching and like my work with them around like where their feelings are, and just like making space for that whole grief process, and just really naming like what you're experiencing like is part of this change, and there's some grief going on here. And so, can you tell me about like what is that even like, what comes up for you when I name it that way?
Mm-hmm. And that's beautiful. Yeah, I'm just thinking, and the naming, I just did a post on Facebook because I am doing a coaching group for new grief coaches to help them get more confident. And I had them do some practice coaching with each other on Wednesday night. And someone named something, and it was your grief is in action or something, or action is your
Mhm.
grief, how you deal with it. And I'm like, wow, that is so cool that you named that, because all of a sudden I actually looked at it for myself, because my mother had, Grandma Ruth died, in January. And all of a sudden I'm like, wow, that's kind of the way I handle grief, as I'm in action. But it was like so cool, because this naming concept is so important, to put it out there and lay it out on this table so that you can really feel it. And everybody has a right to their own feelings, right? But when we name it, then we can start having awareness about, okay, where is that coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very powerful. Like names themselves are very powerful things. And so, that's another transformation that I work with folks around, is like around gender transitions. And so, um, and this is a transformation that like folks aren't often expecting. So I work with a lot of parents, and the way that this is like revealed is, oftentimes parents have like a little bit of a sense of, parents know their child on such a deep way that sometimes it's hard to even put words to. So often, they have a child, and, they're born into the world, and like often in our culture and the way our medical systems work now, like the gender is assigned of their child, I think like at like 6 weeks. So, just like one body part glimpsed, and like gender is assigned, and, colors in rooms are assigned. And so there's just like immediately all of these like identities start developing, and all like these contexts begin to develop. And this whole trajectory and like imagined future begins to be there. And like every parent, I'm sure, totally understands this.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's, just we're in the culture that we're in, and so there's no getting around it. Like, I've definitely known parents who, like don't want to know the gender of their child, and like have, even tried to like keep the body part of their child, you know out of public knowledge. And it's just really hard. Like, I mean, I can't even go walk my dog without someone asking me like, oh, is it a boy or a girl? So,
Yep.
there's so there's all those messages around us all the time. And so we have this like identity in this culture of gender. And so sometimes when parents find out that, their child is a different gender than they've known them as, there's an enormous journey then. Um, and it's so complex. And like I 100% completely believe every parent loves their child, and
Mm-hmm.
they want what's best for their child. But like no one's prepared for like, well, how do you do what's best for your child if you find out their gender is different than you thought it was? Like that was not included in any Dr. Sears book I read. It was not
Nope.
talked about in any prenatal visit I had. Um, any childbirthing, no, 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 absolutely not. So there's no reason why any parent would have any preparation or readiness
Right.
for this. And so, of course, there's a lot of just complex feelings that come in. But it's also, I find that the experience and the path and like what a parent needs to do to really show up for their child is actually really similar to like if they find out something else about their child. Like if you find out your child has a vision need, or a muscular skeletal need. And so, probably the trajectory and that vision you had for your child's life didn't include that either. Or maybe because of some family predisposition, you had like well, maybe that could be there, but it probably wasn't really in that imagined space. And so I looked to a lot of the tools and frameworks. And as an educator, like I was very aware of, some of the tools we use, like parent education, and which I, does actually happen in Dr. Sears' book about like, and what if your child has special needs? So like I modeled a lot of the work that I do, because like there was no handbook of how to do this. So I modeled a lot of what I did and built into my practices from the same supports that we provide families around learning to, love and parent and just be really present and like a really good advocate for their child if their child had some kind of a medical need or a disability. And so some of that does touch on the grief aspect. And so like medical providers, are given a little bit of coaching and structure around that, to anticipate that there can be some grief, and like folks make some space for families to have some complicated grief around that. And it never means that the parents don't love their child. Like that's never the issue. It's, sometimes parents just don't quite know how to love their
They're
child, or they're
confused.
confused. Exactly. And there's so many confusing messages out there. And I mean, there's been messages out there that are really just end up being really harmful. And we do, like sadly, we do, like sometimes family rejection happens, but even that is, I've worked with parents who've that's been what's happened, and they still believe that what they're doing is what's best for their child. But and I try to bring in research and stories and narratives, to give evidence to, here are other ways that this could be done that have been shown to be effective. And so like, here's what other parents have tried. So is there anything in this that could work for you or your family? And like, what I know is that if I can bring a family just one little bit closer to those research-based ways of parenting that are associated with like the really highest outcomes, um, even though it's not perfect, like I think perfection is a myth anyway, but like even though it's on this range and this spectrum, moving them even just a little bit actually has a significant difference in the outcomes that, you know, at least like statistically would be likely for the child, and and altogether for the family. So um being really present with the parent, like where they're at, um in their grief process and their
Mhm.
like, unlearning and like then relearning. And so just that's been really helpful. And I have definitely, like I have seen so many families make incredible, amazing journeys. So
Mhm. I could tell
I can
it's
tell
very
it's very.
emotional. And for me, I think back, I mentioned to you, you didn't know this about me, but back in the 80s, I was a nurse at a hospital here. And it happened to be the hospital where this is when AIDS was becoming the epidemic. And we didn't know a lot about it, but I worked the night shift. And I've always been drawn to just be present with people. It's just something naturally the universe bestowed upon me to be open to that. And I would hold the hands of these young men, 18 years old, 19 years old, who are dying, literally dying. And I would sit at night and hold their hands and just talk and have them share with me and be open. And it was so, I don't know, it changed my life. It totally changed my life because it was, I'm getting emotional now, but that so, they just so many they knew their whole lives, and that was when my was like a young 20. I'm like, I get this. This is not about people choosing to be, this is who they've been their whole life, and then to not have families who can wrap their arms around it. And I just, it was just incredible and really put me on a passionate place with the gay community at the time, and really having no, very little tolerance for any negative talk about
Totally.
that. But then worked with a woman, and she was working with me in the corporate, and her son came out. And she said to me, Pat, she said, I cried. And so when you're talking about the grief, she said, I cried, but I didn't cry because he was gay.
Yes.
I cried because I knew how hard it was going to be for him in the world.
I hear that all the time from parents. And it gets so confusing for, because like I understand that it gets so confusing for the children. And so like especially like our little kids, because they'll see their parent in grief with, and that might show up day to day as sadness or anger, as negotiation, and like, or any of these other parts, and it's not linear, so it's always a mess. And the children personalize it, and they think that like they're causing it, and like our babies are so special in that way, and just like they really want their parents to be happy. And so it's just like one of the hard things. And so like part of what I do also is working with the children around making space for their parents and their family members and their friends, because like, and just that broadening that scope, that like this is a change that like you are experiencing, and it is absolutely never okay for anyone to like hurt you. And so let's talk about some boundaries, because like if any of these things happen, like we need to address that, because that's not okay. You
Right.
should never experience any kind of violence, like verbal or emotional, social or physical. So and so like we're gonna, like I always put up some pretty clear guardrails around that. And I want you to understand that like everybody else is on a journey here too, and it's not because they don't love you. And so I can, like, I just give the kids this constant message: your parents really love you. And so they're trying to figure out like how to love you as they're coming to know this really special new thing about you
Mhm.
that you've actually kind of known about a little longer. And so you've had some time to do some exploration, and like you've known it a little bit more about yourself, and they're like a little bit further behind in this journey. And so like let's have like how to have patience with each other as this transformation occurs. And so like I really believe gender transitions happen in families and in communities. And so like a lot of the work I do is like so a child is like they're realizing that their gender is different than other folks have recognized it, and they're putting words to it. And so some of the littles I work with, they're like they're 4 or 5,
Oh,
and so they're super little. And so part of that, their struggle is like they're trying to even like put words to how they are and how the world is telling them to be, when they don't know that it, like when they know that it doesn't fit right, but like they can't even figure out like what do I need to tell the adults so that they'll get this right. But it's so then it's in the whole classroom space, or it's in a whole school community space, and just really making sure that like everybody connected, maintaining of course like privacy and confidentiality. I'm really good around those pieces, but making the whole community context. So I'm always thinking about the siblings, the friends, the soccer team, and like all these other important spaces. The church is so important for most people. So really, and then sometimes making space for some new communities and some new connections, because like the LGBTQIA2 plus community, like it's actually a whole culture. And like, we've got like flags and holidays and icons and history, good, hard times and good times. And so like the whole family then joins this new culture, which is also similar to like what I've learned. I've learned so many things from our disability like advocates, because like there's this language that I was introduced to at one point by this amazing disability advocate around disability as being part of a joinable community. And so
mm,
I think of the LGBTQIA2 plus, it's a joinable community. And one of the things that about it that's unique is it, there's LGBTQIA2 plus folks in every single family. And so everybody like has that possibility of getting to join this fabulous, colorful, glittery culture. And it is just so fun when families, I mean, I love all of our families, but it is really amazing seeing families, join in part of this culture with their
yep,
children.
yep, yep. And I think because of the work that you do and so many like you, it's growing. It's like one of the coaches that is at my coaching group that I'm working with said, it's like that little pebble, and just allowing those little ripples to go out, and little ripples become big ripples. And so all the work that all of you are doing very passionately, which, gosh, because I work with grief, and I have a lot of parents come to me where their children have stepped off this planet because it's been so difficult to live in their own skin, so to speak.
I,
And it breaks it. It's just like it. I don't. You can't even describe when you're sitting across from someone who. And we have to fix this. I mean, I'm sorry. This is something that we as a community, as a universe, all of us have to really, in my mind, start opening up and just loving unconditionally, because we're all human beings. And so to stop this, I don't even know. I get very passionate just because this has been around my whole life, and I've seen the injustices and heard the remarks, and sometimes I didn't speak up because you're in a place and it's like you sit there and then it just sits in your gut, like, that is so wrong. It's so inappropriate that you're judging another person because of what, their sexuality. What does this have to do with you, number one? I mean, seriously. And I've had so many people in my life that I've seen struggle, um, in their families, in their communities, like I said, holding the hands of these young guys that were on their deathbeds.
it's so
And
sad because
it's
I
just
wish their families could have been there for them.
absolutely,
So sad.
absolutely. And so it's so critical that we continue to raise awareness in any underserved population. But to be doing this work with our kiddos, our little children, like you said, these babies.
They're just babies. And I really believe, they come into the universe, like into our lives, and they are perfect and whole.
Yep.
So then how do we make those spaces around them where they get to unfold into their just full brilliance?
Yep.
Um, and the more we're able to do that, I believe the more love and joy then comes into our lives. Um, and there really is a lot of love and joy on the other side of that grief. Um, Even families that like I have seen who have experienced some of the hardest times you know, because of the cruelties in our world. They've had losses, they've lost family members, they've lost churches, they've lost sometimes entire school communities over their child's like loving their child and like making the space for their child to be who they are. But they've, through like they have moved through all of those losses and that grief, and found new community and new ways of being and loving that are so much more expansive, that have like changed them in ways they never would have imagined possible.
Something
So
just came to me. I have to write it down. Grief propels us forward.
it does. I do believe that. I think that's
Yep.
absolutely wise and right. um and I like one of the things I really want to like push back against, especially like in our white culture. Like I was just at a doctor's appointment, and like I'm going through like my own grief and like identity transformation of like accepting like a disability that's probably been present like my whole life. But it's painful, like there's physical pain, but there's also like I was at the doctor's office and I'm still grieving like this last little loss of like, well, maybe it's really not this thing. And
Mm-hmm.
like, but it's just really becoming more clear it's this thing. And so like I just like teared up a little bit, and I kept the tears in because I have not found that it is ever helpful to cry at a doctor's office. And like it's like, and certainly not just in my own experience like with like a male doctor. So like I mean already like folks who are marginalized just get like dismissed and just don't necessarily get the medical care that they ought to get. But I have found like the more like I can be like, kind of stoic and really rational. And like, I don't know, like if I play the good patient, I get a little bit better medical care, but it doesn't nourish like my whole self. But I've just found I have to go get that other stuff elsewhere and just not to expect it from the medical provider. But like, as I was like driving home, I was reflecting about that, and like I couldn't get the tears to come out like when I got to the car, and I was like in a space where I could have done that. And I was remembering the words of one of my like teachers, Ramona Stately, and she's an Indigenous leader, and she had offered me this wisdom that like our tears, like in her culture, her people understand that tears are healing, like crying is healing.
Yep.
And the poison becomes just when you hold them in, and like holding in that grief or that pain, it becomes like poisons the self. And so I really just hope that our culture more broadly can make more space for our emotions, our sadness and our anger. And like, even though none, like those things aren't very pretty, um, they're so necessary and important to the transformation and to the change. Like I sometimes make comparisons to like being a runner. Like I'm not a great runner, but I do love running. And it's really good for me. And I just have to know that like I, it's gonna, I'm gonna have sore muscles, and like there's just gonna be some soreness, there's gonna be some bad days, there's gonna be some good days. Not every run's gonna feel like great, but just I have to keep it up. Like I have to keep engaging, I have to keep committed to it. And you know because there's a bigger picture that I know is healthy and good.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when you're talking about the tears and with the indigenous culture, number one is my husband comes from the indigenous culture. And so when our nephew Coleman died, uh, they did the tribal wake and that type of thing. And at the end, we had the wiping of the tears ceremony. So it was like, okay, the wiping of the tears was to not stop crying, but to allow the tears to dry up a little bit, to allow the spirit of your loved one to not be tethered
Mm,
and held. So it was
mm.
really beautiful because they do a 4 day wake and it's
Oh,
24/7. So it's
important.
crying. And it doesn't mean that you stop crying, but these tears are so necessary. So they actually named that ceremony the wiping of the tears and had a very big ceremony about that because it is so necessary for the cleansing and the healing. Grief is a part of a healing process. It is a component. I tell people I'm a nurse by background, right? If you have been mangled in a horrible accident, at first there's this shock. And I'm sure this goes for family members and parents when all of a sudden their children are going, I'm not the identity that you think that I have been, or maybe at a niggling, but I'm sharing this with you now, or someone's sharing it
Yes.
with them.
Yes.
And there's the shock. And if you're in a bad accident, a lot of times you might end up going to the hospital and they're going to put you in a induced coma just to allow your body to kind of regenerate and do what it needs to do. And then you start coming out of that coma. They start bringing you out, and all of a sudden the pain really sets in. It's like, oh my God, our nerves are firing. That's when the tears really do need to flow. So I really encourage my clients, it's like, you need to cry. And I said, think of it like a mountain that has all these craggy crevices and the rocks are jutting out, but then a waterfall year after year, that waterfall. And what happens? It just starts smoothing the face of that mountain. It becomes smooth. The colors start showing up. It's more vibrant and it's so peaceful. And that's what I think tears are. We need to allow them out so that it can start softening the ravages and craggy edges of this grief that we all hold at one point or another in our life,
Yeah,
right?
that's a beautiful image. Yeah, and it doesn't mean that like those jagged parts weren't there, or maybe
Right.
even there was like a beautiful thing that was once there. That it doesn't, the new face of it does not in any way deny or negate what had been there before.
Right,
Um,
right.
Even as we make space for what is now and what will be in the future.
So we're about nearing the end here, but this is what I like to ask all of my guests when I interview them. Can you leave us with one, if there's anything that you would like to impart upon the listeners here, what is that? Give it to us. Just what is the one thing that you would like people to leave with?
Absolutely. So I recently was invited, like I've read John Lewis's last letter to community a couple times, and this, like I was recently, like it came to me again, and like I really do believe the universe like has lessons for us, and like if you don't get it, like the universe is just going to keep putting it in front of you. So I think it was like the fifth time maybe I was reading John Lewis's last letter, and he used this word beloved community, and for some reason that day, like I was like, beloved community. I mean, I'd read it before, and like, beloved community sounded all nice and all, but like for some reason that day, I was like, what's packed into that? Like, is there something I'm missing here? And so I just like opened up another window and searched for beloved community. And it brought me to Martin Luther King's writings and like his vision of beloved community. And part of that writing, and like, and he struggled with being part of changes and just hardships and like and grief, was this deep faith that the moral arc of the universe like bends towards justice, and so to just keep loving, to keep being peaceful, and to just hold on to that faith that where you are today is where you're meant to be, and like what is coming ahead that you're going to be ready for, and that like that bigger arc is leading to justice and to like what our whole beloved community needs.
That is so beautiful. Beloved community.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean, especially right now, there are just some days I feel like there's just so many hard things happening. It's just overwhelming. And like, I feel like I can't, like, I'm just afraid that I'm going to become numb, but I also don't feel like I have enough resources to feel everything for all the hard things that are happening. And so I just keep reminding myself of that faith. I feel like we are in a moment, like a crucible or like a phoenix,
yeah.
and like that I just have faith that on the other side of this, there's gonna be better things.
Me too. Me too. I mean, it's just like this was the awakening.
Mm.
This is the awakening. We are in the midst of it, that yeah, like that phoenix rising coming out of the fire. We're not there yet.
No, we're
There's
not out of
still
this fire yet.
a lot of things that, we're our all our nerves are firing. We just came out of that coma and we're in that burn unit and getting debrided day by day. But it's necessary. Those things are necessary to open up, give it air,
Yes.
give it air, give it acknowledgement,
Yeah,
and to the more one by one that we are able to love each other through it.
exactly.
That's
Exactly.
what it is.
So much grace, so much love as we hang in together
Yeah.
through this.
Oh, this is beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Just hang on. I'm just going to stop the recording. So how might people, if they ever wanted to reach out to you, how could they reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I do consulting, and I work with a very wide range of folks. I am really a cultural transformation specialist, and so I work with organizations and people, sometimes family, but like towards getting to like, big changes. So I was just working with an amazing camp recently, and I have lots of fun. But yeah, just like my first name dot my last name at gmail.com. And I'm like
Okay.
on LinkedIn and stuff too. So but yeah, and I always just love getting questions from people, and like I love people, and so I
All right. I will put that in the show notes too so that it's there so
yeah.
that people can easily access because you're a definite resource that we need in our world.
Thank you, Pat. Thanks for doing what you do.
Okay. Hang on. See ya. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Peace out. Hi there. Thank you for stopping by our Healing Family Grief channel, where grief can transform into peace, purpose, and even joy. That is the intention. So, as host of the Healing Family Grief channel, my goal is to provide insight, inspiration, and hope for people who are grieving a deep loss, or for the people who want to provide support for those who are struggling on their grief journey. If you like what you hear, please like us, give us a thumbs up, and subscribe to our channel to hear more. Also, feel free to share any episodes that you feel could be helpful to someone you know. For more information about the Confident Grief Coach School, or to find a grief coach, or perhaps to order one of my free ebooks, please check out our website at www.healingfamilygrief.com.